frozen in my barn since 1975, and DNA from 3 labs confirmed it's 98% human, genetically engineered by an ancient civilization before modern science existed. Government documents from 1952 prove they've known this entire time, and what I discovered inside this creature is exactly why they've been hunting me for decades. The snow started falling around 3 in the afternoon that November day. I was alone, 5 miles into federal forest land, tracking what I'd assumed was a large bull elk. The prints were massive, leading through old-growth Douglas fir. The temperature was dropping fast, maybe 25 degrees Fahrenheit. I'd been hunting these mountains since I was 14. I thought I knew what lived out here. I was wrong. The movement came from my left, maybe 50 yards upslope. Something big pushing through hemlock saplings. The branches didn't just shake, they snapped. I raised my rifle, assuming it was a bear. But the way this thing moved, upright, bipedal, deliberate, that wasn't bear behavior. I had maybe 3 seconds to decide. The shape was dark against the snow, massive, moving with strange fluid grace. My mind was screaming bear, but my gut knew better. The crosshairs settled on center mass, and in that split second before I fired, I swear the shape turned toward me, like it knew I was there. I squeezed the trigger. The rifle crack echoed through the canyon. The shape went down hard, and I heard something, a vocalization. Not quite a scream, not quite a roar. Something in between that made every hair on my body stand up. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. The forest held its breath. I approached slowly, each step feeling like it took forever. My heart hammered against my ribs. When I pushed through the last curtain of hemlock branches, I stopped breathing entirely. It was lying on its side, one arm stretched out toward me as if reaching. 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, matted with blood that steamed in the cold air. The shoulders were impossibly broad, but it was the face that changed something inside me forever. Almost human. God help me, almost human. Heavy brow ridge, broad flat nose, lips pulled back from teeth that were neither animal nor entirely human. The eyes were brown, not the flat predator eyes of a bear. Brown eyes with depth, with intelligence, with something that looked like understanding. And the hands. 5 fingers, opposable thumbs, fingernails instead of claws. There was mud caked under those nails. I'd taken the life of a Bigfoot, a real, breathing creature that every scientist said was impossible. And it was lying at my feet, cooling in the snow, while steam rose from the entry wound in its chest. I should have left it there, but I stood in the gathering darkness and made a choice that would define the next 48 years. I would hide it, study it, because I knew what would happen if I called anyone. The government would come, the creature would disappear into some classified facility. This thing deserved better. Getting that body out of those mountains nearly broke me. 743 pounds on a makeshift sled. 3 hours of hauling through snow and darkness, terrified someone would see me. The creature's arm kept slipping off the sled, dragging in the snow, leaving a trail I'd have to come back and cover. But nobody came. The forest kept its secrets, and I kept mine. My property sat at the end of a dirt road, 40 acres with a house my grandfather built in 1947. The barn was older, pre-war construction. My nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. Perfect for hiding something the world wasn't ready to know about. I had an old meat locker in the barn, a walk-in freezer my grandfather used for storing elk. That night, the truth hit me like cold water. This was exactly what I needed, and exactly what terrified me. I worked through the night in sustained terror, reinforcing shelves with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, installing a secondary lock, covering the window with sheet metal, imagining helicopters, agents closing in. What if someone heard the power tools at 4 in the morning? What if the body started decomposing? What if whatever created this thing came looking for it? By dawn, the creature was inside, wrapped in tarps, freezer set to 0. The compressor hummed like a heartbeat. I locked the door twice. Then I vomited from a pure adrenaline crash. I'd just hidden proof that everything we thought we knew was wrong. Those first months, I barely slept. Every evening after work, I'd spend hours in that barn, documenting everything. I wasn't a scientist, but I'd field-dressed hundreds of animals and knew how to observe and record. The measurements were staggering. 8 feet, 2 inches tall, 743 pounds. The hands had opposable thumbs, articulated fingers with fingerprint ridges, loops and whorls just like human prints. Calluses suggesting tool use. The right palm had a thick callus exactly where you'd get one from gripping a stick repeatedly. The feet told their own story. 16 inches long with distinctive mid-foot flexibility. The wear patterns showed it preferred rocky terrain, avoiding soft ground where it might leave tracks. I took photographs. Hair samples in envelopes. The hair was hollow, insulating. Tissue samples preserved in jars. I worked methodically. But it was the brain case that haunted me. When I measured the skull, my hands started shaking. The cranial capacity was at least 1,500 cubic centimeters, well within human range, maybe above average. This creature had a brain capable of complex thought. It wasn't just an animal. It was intelligent, and I'd taken its life without knowing what it was. The guilt started that first winter and never left. Every time I opened that freezer, I wondered, what had it been thinking? Did it have a family? Were there others mourning this one? These questions drove me to learn everything I could. Janet called that winter. We dated briefly in 1974. She'd moved to Portland and wanted to reconnect. Asked if I'd come visit. I made excuses. Work was busy. Roads were bad. All lies. I couldn't risk someone getting close enough to ask questions about why I spent every evening in my barn. She stopped calling after the third rejection. Married someone else 2 years later. I had kids. Everything I couldn't have because I was protecting something the world claimed didn't exist. In the summer of 1977, everything changed. Unmarked vehicles on the highway. Dark sedans with government plates, driving slowly, watching the tree line. A helicopter passed over my property twice in 1 week. Then a man appeared in town. Mid-40s, dark suit, asking questions about unusual wildlife sightings. He claimed he was from Fish and Wildlife, but when I called to verify, they had no record of him. I became paranoid, started covering the barn windows, installed motion sensors, stopped taking the body out for examination. One night in August, the sensors triggered. 3 in the morning. I grabbed my rifle. Flashlights in my woods. 3 of them, moving in formation, sweeping systematically. They spent nearly 3 hours on my property before disappearing. I watched from darkness, rifle loaded, safety off. But they left without finding anything. They'd been looking in the wrong place, focused on the woods instead of the barn. They knew something was out here. The old-timers had been right. The stories about government men in the 50s and 60s making people disappear who claimed to see things, those weren't fantasies. They were real. Someone in authority knew about these creatures, and they were actively suppressing evidence. If you're fascinated by what's really hiding in our forests and what the government doesn't want us to know, subscribe now. I spent the next 2 decades being careful, paranoid careful. I varied my routines, bought food from different towns. That's the thing about keeping a secret this big. You start questioning your own sanity. Maybe the real suppression program was making people think they were crazy. But I never stopped studying what I had. Through the 80s and 90s, I documented everything. The hair structure was unique. The muscle density is extraordinary. The skeletal structure showed adaptations for mountain terrain. By 1998, I had notebooks full of observations, hundreds of photographs, and samples preserved. Then DNA testing became available to civilians. I'd been waiting 23 years. I drove to Seattle using back roads, used a false name, paid cash, told the lab I'd found remains of an unknown primate species. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived. I drove home with it unopened, hands shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. I opened it alone in the barn. The lab report was technical, but one section stopped me cold. The sample showed primarily human. DNA, not similar. Primarily human, 98.4% match modern Homo sapiens, but mixed with sequences that didn't match any known population. The remaining 1.6% was something else entirely. The lab flagged it as contaminated, suggested I resubmit. But I knew there was no contamination, which meant these creatures were genetically human, mostly human, but with something else, something that shouldn't be possible. I sat on the barn floor for an hour. If they were mostly human, were they a hybrid? Something deliberately created? I needed better testing, but getting those answers meant risk. For now, I had a clue. Evidence that what I'd been hiding wasn't just an undiscovered animal. It was something far stranger. Winter of 2003 proved there were others. It started with sounds. February night, temperature near zero. I heard it through the walls, a vocalization unlike anything I'd heard in 28 years. Low, oscillating, primal. It started low, rose to a peak, then dropped, again in a pattern that felt deliberate. It made the windows vibrate. It came from the woods behind my property. I grabbed my rifle and a spotlight. Nothing visible. But the sound came again, closer. They were here. They'd always been here. And now they were making themselves known. Over 3 months, evidence accumulated. Massive footprints in snow. Trees twisted at 8 feet high. One morning in March, I found an entire deer carcass placed on my porch. Not dragged. Placed. The deer's neck was broken cleanly. No blood trail. No tracks despite fresh snow. It was a message. They knew what I had hidden. They could reach me anytime they wanted. Then in April, the markers appeared. Stacks of stones in cans. 3 stones, always 3. Sticks woven into X patterns at exactly eye level for something 8 feet tall. These were documented Sasquatch signs. But seeing them meant for me, that was different. The arrangements became more elaborate, like they were leading me somewhere. Curiosity and guilt drove me into the woods, following markers deeper into federal land. They led me to a clearing hidden in old-growth cedar, and there, arranged with obvious care, I found bones. The skeleton of a juvenile Sasquatch, maybe 4 feet tall, laid out in anatomical position, surrounded by a circle of river stones. Small offerings nearby, pine cones in patterns, unusual rocks, carved wood. This was a burial site. And standing at the tree line were shapes, 3 of them, massive, still, silent, watching me. They'd wanted me to find this place. They wanted me to understand this wasn't just an animal I'd fired upon. It was a person, a member of a family, a community, a culture that buried their lost ones with ceremony. They had rituals. They understood the permanent cessation of life. They understood loss. I backed away slowly, hands shaking. They just watched as I retreated. I'd committed an act equivalent to ending a life, not hunting. The removal of life from a thinking, being. And they'd let me live with that knowledge for 28 years before showing me. The siege escalated through fall of 2004. Every night, sounds surround my property, howls from multiple directions, wood knocks in patterns that feel like communication. My sensors triggered constantly, but cameras showed nothing. Then came October 23rd. I woke at 2 in the morning to silence. Complete silence. They'd cut the power. The kind of quiet that means predators are close. I grabbed my rifle and went to check the barn. The barn doors were standing open. Both of them. I knew I'd locked them. I approached slowly. Inside, everything was intact. Mostly. The tarps had been folded. The freezer door was open. The body had been partially thawed, moved, touched. There were handprints on the frost. Massive handprints with clear finger marks. They'd gotten inside while I slept, found their lost companion, and then left it. And on the wall above the freezer, drawn in the frost, was a symbol. A circle with a handprint inside it. It meant, we were here, we know, we remember. They could have ended me, but they chose not to. Instead, they demonstrated intelligence, restraint, psychological warfare far beyond anything an animal could conceive. They wanted me to know they could reach me any time, that my locks meant nothing, that I existed only because they allowed it. What do you think these creatures really are? Drop your theories in the comments. I spent the next few years waiting, but they withdrew into silence. They'd made their point. Until March of 2008. I was in town when a county surveyor checked my barn. By the time I returned, there was a business card on my table and a note. We need to talk about what's in your freezer. M. Kress. Someone knew, after 33 years. I called with shaking hands. I'm a cryptozoology enthusiast, Mr. Mitchell. Have been since I was 12. I know what I saw. We should talk. It was blackmail, politely phrased. I agreed to meet him and brought my rifle. Martin was 42 and spent his free time researching Sasquatch. Instead of reporting it, he wanted access. I threatened him. But Martin showed me the photos. Clear, undeniable images. I don't want to expose you, he said. I want to study it properly. But I need time. So do you. He left. I spent the next week convinced federal agents were coming. Martin returned 1 week later. I was waiting with my rifle, but he came alone. I've spent my entire adult life trying to prove these creatures exist, and in 30 years, I've never found anything more than footprints and blurry photographs. He looked at me with desperation. You have the only physical proof ever documented. If you let me study it, we could finally answer questions people have been asking for centuries. Martin wasn't my enemy. He was a believer who'd found his holy grail. We reached an agreement. Martin could study the body under strict conditions. In exchange, he'd bring equipment, contacts, and expertise. He started visiting weekly with sophisticated equipment. He was meticulous, treating the body with reverence. Martin had connections to private genetics labs. He submitted samples under false claims, primate remains, burial discoveries. Different labs, different stories. The results came back in 2009. What they revealed made my 1998 testing look like a rough draft. Multiple labs confirmed, primarily human DNA, that same 98.4%. But Martin's advanced testing went deeper. They found markers from Neanderthal genetics, Denisovan DNA, others completely unidentifiable. But most disturbing, clear evidence of deliberate genetic manipulation. Sequences that couldn't occur naturally. Genetic patterns that looked designed, engineered. Someone created them, Martin said, staring at the reports, hands trembling. Long before modern science claimed genetic engineering was possible, they're manufactured. The question is, who had that technology thousands of years ago, and why? We'd uncovered proof of ancient genetic technology that shouldn't exist. Martin suggested we talk to indigenous elders. Their oral traditions might preserve knowledge modern society has lost. Through his networks, Martin connected me with William Redhawk from the Yakima Nation. The drive to the reservation took 3 hours. William waited on his porch, 78 years old, but his eyes looked ancient, like they'd been carrying secrets for decades. William gestured us inside. The first thing I saw, photographs covering a wall, cave petroglyphs, dozens of them. And in every image, carved into stone centuries ago, stood tall, hair-covered beings alongside human forms, not hunting them, standing together. "My grandfather told me stories," William said. "You're the first to come with proof." He looked at my photographs, the body, the DNA reports. His expression never changed, just confirmation. "They weren't born from nature," he said quietly. "They were made, created by the sky people in the before time." He showed us more petroglyphs, creation scenes, tall beings emerging from light, symbols suggesting manufacture, purpose. The same stories in multiple tribes, beings created by advanced visitors as protectors of the forests. "They were made to be guardians," William explained. "The sky people could shape life itself. The guardians were one of their creations." The convergence was undeniable. Modern DNA evidence, indigenous oral traditions, physical evidence, all pointing to the same truth. These creatures were manufactured thousands of years ago. "The government has known since the 1940s, William said. "They've been hiding evidence. They know about the sky people too." That's when Martin told me about the documents. Martin arrived in March 2012 carrying a manila envelope, hands shaking. "Someone inside the Department of Defense leaked these. If anyone traces them, we're going to prison, or worse." I opened it. Documents dated 1952. Project Gigantes. References to hybrid population management in Pacific Northwest forests. Orders to monitor prehistoric remnants. Instructions to suppress civilian evidence about origin sites. One document referenced these mountains. Systematic surveys for anomalous bipedal entities. The government had been suppressing evidence for 70 years. More disturbing, references to pre-contact genetic programs. The government knew who'd created them. One line read, "Continued monitoring of hybrid populations essential to maintaining redacted regarding pre-contact technological capabilities." A document dated 1977, 2 years after I'd taken the creature, referenced my region. Intensive survey, North Cascades sector. Asset recovery unsuccessful. Maintain surveillance. They'd been looking for what I took, and when they failed, they'd maintained surveillance for 37 years. "They'll never stop looking," Martin said. "Anyone who finds evidence becomes a target." If this proves what you've always suspected, that we've been lied to, hit that like button and share this. By 2023, Martin and I had decades of documentation. The body, DNA analysis, government documents, indigenous testimonies, everything to prove these creatures existed and expose the truth. But Martin was running out of time. Cancer, pancreatic, stage 4, months to live. He started organizing our research with frantic urgency. His final wish, go public, release everything. I resisted. 48 years of secrecy was hard to abandon, but Martin was right. The world deserved to know. We planned a coordinated release, multiple platforms simultaneously, everything at once to prevent suppression. Date, May 1st, 2023, 3 weeks away. Then, April 12th, they came back. I was working when I saw them. Markers, stacks of stones, sticks woven into X patterns, the same signs from 20 years earlier. They'd been silent for decades, but now, 3 weeks before we were planning to reveal everything, they were back, leaving a trail. I followed the markers into the forest. They led me deeper than before. It took an hour of hard hiking to reach the destination, a clearing. And waiting there, standing in full daylight, 4 Sasquatch. The largest was massive, maybe 9 feet tall, graying, old, heavily scarred. Beside it stood 2 others, adults, healthy, and behind them, a juvenile, peering at me with curiosity. A family, not monsters. A family showing themselves deliberately. I lowered my rifle. The message was clear. We're still here. We know what you're planning, and we're giving permission. For 20 minutes I watched them. The juvenile made soft chirping sounds. The female groomed its shoulder. The large male sat on a fallen log, watching me with eyes that held wisdom. I'd spent 48 years studying a preserved specimen, but watching this family in the filtered sunlight, seeing them care for each other, exist as people, it broke something inside me, or healed something I didn't know was broken. They were beautiful, ancient, enduring. We'd been treating them like cryptids, like problems to be hidden. The large male stood slowly. He pointed at me, then at himself. Then he placed his hand over his chest and extended it toward me, palm up. The meaning was clear. We are the same, different, but the same in the ways that matter. Then they turned and melted into the forest, silent, graceful, gone in seconds. But I'd seen them, living, breathing beings who'd chosen to reveal themselves after 48 years. They wanted me to tell their story. They were tired of being myths. They wanted the world to know they were real. Martin passed away 6 weeks later, on May 23rd, 2023. Peacefully, knowing our documentation was complete. But after my encounter with the family, I made a different decision. The body stays hidden. Some things are worth more as mysteries than as museum pieces. I won't give the government the satisfaction of carving up evidence, putting it in some classified facility. That creature deserves better. But I'm telling this story now, preparing to release the documentation without the body, the DNA evidence, the photographs, the government documents, the indigenous testimonies, all proving these creatures exist, proving they were created through ancient genetic engineering, proving the government has been suppressing this for decades. The Sasquatch are real. They're out here in these mountains, surviving in the margins. They're not animals. They're people. Manufactured people. Created for purposes we don't understand, but people nonetheless. The government knows. They've known since the 1940s. They have bodies in storage, classified programs, evidence they've been hiding for 70 years. The indigenous tribes have always known. Their stories aren't myths, they're historical records. The Sky People, the Guardians, the ancient creation events, all describing what DNA confirms. Deliberate genetic engineering, thousands of years ago. And the creatures themselves know. They're intelligent enough to understand surveillance, to communicate through symbols, to decide when to hide and when to reveal themselves. I'm 76 now. I've kept this secret for 48 years. But secrets like this demand to be told. There are more of them out there. They're not extinct, just incredibly good at staying hidden. And maybe they're safer in the shadows. But the world deserves to know they exist. Deserves to understand that our history is more complex than we've been told, that ancient civilizations had capabilities we can barely comprehend. The body stays in my barn. When I pass, the location goes with me. But the evidence, the truth, that's going out into the world. And maybe someday these creatures can step out of the shadows without fear, can be recognized as survivors of an ancient creation program, people who deserve dignity and protection instead of suppression. This is my testimony. 48 years of hidden truth and close encounters with something the government says doesn't exist. But somewhere in these mountains, they're watching, waiting to see if humanity is finally ready to acknowledge what's been hiding in the forests all along. Subscribe if you want to follow more investigations. These mountains still hold secrets I'm working to uncover. And next time you're hiking in remote timber, pay attention to the sounds you can't explain, the shadows that don't move quite right, the feeling of being watched by something intelligent. They're out there. They've always been out there. And now you know they're real.